right. This is great. Well, good afternoon and welcome to Grace Farms. I'm Sharon Prince, CEO and founder of Grace Farms Foundation. We are thrilled to host you, Governor Lamont, as well as the state COO Josh Jabel, and also Director of Procurement Jean Burke, and Dr. Rohit Bala of Stanford Health, Wyatt Bosworth from CBIA, and all of your wonderful teams for the ceremonial bill signing here at Grace Farms that codifies ethics in the state procurement process and also with the contracts as well. It was fantastic to be able to give you a tour, Governor, of the River Building, adding to this important day at Grace Farms, a publicly available humanitarian and cultural center on these 80 preserved acres. Our nature, arts, justice, community, and faith initiatives increase diverse perspectives and inclusive collaboration. Here, we are committed to address pressing issues together, including modern slavery, environmental sustainability, food insecurity, and disconnected communities. This unique approach often leads to unprecedented new outcomes, one we are highlighting today. It is here in the River Building that we bring together members of the community, state and national government members, the private sector, law enforcement officers, survivors of violent crimes, Nobel Peace Prize winners, such as Dr. Dennis Mukwege and also Nadia Murad, artists, scholars, and subject matter experts from around the globe. It is only fitting, as our first event on site in these last 16 months, that we are gathered here in a space that not too long ago was dedicated to sourcing, distributing, and donating 2 million life-saving PPE, and we are still preparing and now donating over 275,000 pounds of nutritious meals right here in the Commons. Indeed, it's because of our team's understanding of the complexities of supply chains and the global movement of products that we were poised to help secure PPE and efficiently deliver at the height of the pandemic. On March 9, 2020, we closed our doors to the public early, affording our team the opportunity to quickly pivot to meet the moment. I would like to recognize their tireless efforts and entrepreneurial ethos, including our CAO, Rod Katabi, CMO, Chelsea Thatcher, and COO, Sherry Sweeney, as well as a steadfast partnership we forged with the state of Connecticut under Governor Lamont's bold leadership. Together, we were able to leverage expertise and work as a team across the government and in partnership with the private sector to help keep our doctors, nurses, and our brave front-line responders safe. This was an unprecedented crisis, and at a time when everyone had to use their wherewithal in unexpected ways around the clock. Of the 2 million PPE, we secured and did deliver over 500,000 N95 face masks, half of which Josh Gabel's team quickly picked up, and we also donated 28,000 N95s to Stanford Health by April 7th. The medical-grade PPE was distributed across Connecticut to 53 organizations, including community health centers, nursing homes, local police and fire departments in 24 towns, as they served hospital and hospice patients, as well as individuals and families in supportive housing. Our new Canaan Voluntary Fire Department enabled us to turn around PPE within 24 hours to targeted recipients around the state by loading up their own trucks. They count this effort as one of the most significant undertakings in their 136-year history. Which brings us to this moment. We are honored to host this ceremonial bill signing today for a law that codifies ethics in the state government procurement and contract process. Public Act number 2176, an act concerning the modernization of state services, promotes and puts a premium on fairness at every step of the process, and that tightens important controls. At Grace Farms, fulfilling our commitment to closing the PPE gap at the height of the pandemic has made possible really through the state of Connecticut, and this bill makes it even easier to partner and work with the state, particularly in times of crises, which can ultimately save lives. This type of public-private partnership is an extraordinary example of what we can achieve together. Connecticut, under the governor's leadership, has forged even stronger public-private partnerships with organizations like Grace Farms, ensuring that we remain prepared to meet any challenge we may face as a state. Ethical procurement in supply chains is really a long-ignored challenge, but one that is central to our foundation. We launched Design for Freedom last October, which is a new movement with 60 design and construction industry leaders to create a radical paradigm shift to eliminate forced labor in the building materials supply chain. We're asking architects, engineers, construction managers, owners, really all of us, as we all influence the supply chain, to add human rights as a fundamental criterion in procuring business and building materials. We look forward to continued collaboration with all of you at each level of government to work not just in response to a challenge, but to proactively protect against another crisis and have a framework for solving pressing problems. We invite you to come back to Grace Farms a little more time as well when we reopen in September with a new visitor experience while our humanitarian work continues in this hopeful space. Our Common Good in Crisis exhibition will spotlight our partnership with the state of Connecticut. Grace and peace are taking shape here. It is our honor to host the ceremonial signing here today of Public Act 2176. And I'd like to turn it over to our first selectman, Kevin Moynihan.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. It's my privilege to welcome the governor to New Canaan today and his honored guests and staff members. The governor has done a terrific job with COVID, and I really appreciate everything he's done throughout. The weekly calls and everything have been absolutely amazing. New Canaan has done a fabulous job with COVID, and I want to, thank Sharon before for the enormous amount of work that was done with the PPE last year and the food. So Sharon and Grace Farms, thank you. It's so great to see all the Grace Farm family members that we haven't seen in months, in almost a year in many cases. So anyway, Grace Farms is a very special place for New Canaan. As you can see, it's a beautiful, beautiful corner of New Canaan, and it's great to have you here, Governor. Thank you. I think I'm supposed to introduce Josh.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. First Selectman. Sharon, thanks so much for having us here today at this just stunning facility. Those of us that are here for the first time, I think, are all feeling the same way. We're kind of swimming right now as we go down the river. So we are here today in large part to say thank you to the team at Grace Farms. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only about a year and a half ago when we were just entering that first wave of the pandemic, and it became clear very quickly that the global supply chain for PPE was completely broken, and we had to turn to trusted friends and partners like Grace Farms, who basically stopped everything they were doing and turned their attention to the world's biggest problem at the time, which was how do we find PPE? And your work during that period of time saved lives. I mean, there's absolutely no question about it. The PPE you delivered to our healthcare workers, our first responders, at a time when it was so hard to find. Everybody was searching for the same products around the world. Leveraging your network made such an amazing difference. And so we're here to say thank you. And as you mentioned, to sign a piece of legislation which reflects the fact that we're not in that crazy time right now, right? The global supply chain for PPE is stabilized probably close to a year ago now. But it's important that we not forget the lessons that we should learn from COVID. And one of those lessons picks up on a point the governor often points out, is that in government we typically have a bad case of the slows. We don't do things fast. But during COVID, we did a lot of stuff really fast. And we need to learn from why that was and how we did it. And a lot of it had to do with working with public-private partnerships, working with organizations like Grace Farms that can help us get things done quickly. But it also showed that there's certain things that we do that maybe we don't need to do. I mean, when we were in that period of time, we literally took the traditional procurement playbook, we ripped it in half, we threw it out the window, and we were just out in the Wild West trying to find what we needed. Now, that's not sustainable in the long term. But there are things that we have done historically, rules that get built up, laws that get passed that kind of accumulate over the years, And very rarely do we go back in government and kind of question, do we really still need those? And so this bill has over a dozen different sections that essentially simplify and streamline a lot of things that had existed in statute that had outlived their life, or that we could consolidate and streamline in a way that enabled us to go faster. And I'll just give you 3 really quick examples. There are provisions in here that eliminate over 80,000 forms that businesses have to fill out, notarize, scan, upload every year just to do business with the state of Connecticut. So we've consolidated that in the main contract, make the state much easier to do business with. That'll get a lot more companies able to provide for the state, get the taxpayers more value for their dollar. A second example is, at some point in time, a long time ago, well before Will was in the legislature, so this was definitely not his fault, someone decided it was a good idea to create a separate set of standards for how a business could get certified as a small and minority-owned business. Now, the federal government already does a very good job with this through the Small Business Administration, a very thoughtful, robust set of guidelines. Connecticut created their own. And that's caused us to have a small staff to support it, more complexity and paperwork and bureaucracy for small businesses who want to get certified as a smaller or minority-owned business. And so we've done away with that. We're just using the federal standard now. Very simple. If you're certified by the feds, that's good enough in Connecticut. It's actually a more thoughtful framework. So there's some simplification, time given back to people there. Last example I'll share is that, believe it or not, written into general statutes, there's a number of places where it literally requires people to do things in paper or manual ways that could otherwise be done online. Sending registered snail mail, or going to an office to apply for some benefit, or paying by cash or check when we all pay for things online every day. So there's a provision in the bill that basically gives every state agency the permission to use modern digital tools to transact with state government, enables us to bring forward the governor's vision for all digital government that we're working very hard to achieve. So just a few examples among over a dozen provisions in this bill that help us codify some of the lessons learned from COVID, how we can move faster as a state government, deliver better services for our constituents. Looking forward to the challenges we have, wanting to make the best use of all the taxpayer dollars that we collect, provide the best services we can. We have a large retirement cliff coming, so we're trying to really focus our efforts on where we can add the most value, and this bill helps us go a long way. So I want to thank the legislators who helped get this legislation through. The 2 leaders of the GAE committee, Senator May Flexer and Representative Dan Fox, couldn't be here, but their leadership really brought this bill through the legislature, including some drama in the last couple of days there, got it done. Also want to thank Senator Will Haskell, who's the vice chair of that committee. His leadership was also instrumental both on this bill and so many others that really make a tremendous difference for the state. So thank you, Senator Haskell. And so it's now my pleasure to introduce Gene Burke. Gene is one of the newest state employees. He just joined us from a distinguished private sector career at one of the largest cybersecurity firms. He was a director of procurement for Stanford University. True to the governor's, one of the real themes of his administration, we're trying to bring in a lot of people with private sector experience who can bring best practices, relook at a lot of the things we do in government differently, and reinvent ourselves for the challenges to come. So we're really delighted to have Gene on board as our new state's director of procurement.
Thanks, Josh. As the newest member of the team, I have to say that I was really thrilled to see this bill and its commitment to continuous improvement that really makes it a lot easier for companies to do business with the state of Connecticut. And among those improvements, some of which Josh had highlighted, they really do make a difference in terms of avoiding confusion, ease of access, and the ability to be more effective and allow us to have greater reach into the supplier community in the state. Among them, the commissioner now has the ability to waive competitive bidding for purchases of non-recurring purchases of $10,000 or less, which is very nice in terms of being able to pivot and move very, very quickly. That aligning of the minority and small business definitions with the federal guidelines is going to eliminate a lot of confusion on the part of the small businesses who are harder pressed to be able to understand what all the rules are for doing business with their government partners. And one of the ones that I found most intriguing, because I hadn't experienced it in the private sector, the requirement to file affidavits with bid submissions, multiple affidavits with bid submissions, and the elimination of almost all of those. I would point out, however, that the ethical considerations that are built into a lot of those affidavits in the past, those provisions have not gone away. It's not that we've lowered the standards of how we do business, it's that we found a way to incorporate them into the contract documents themselves and avoid the additional paperwork necessary in order to make them be part of the contracting process. And then the other thing that we've done is improve the way to allow the towns and municipalities in the state of Connecticut to piggyback on state contracts so they can take advantage of the leverage of our pricing and the state's contracts, terms and conditions. And like states around the country and countries around the world, Connecticut learned how important it was in the procurement of PPE and medical equipment to have really strong relationships within the community, both the nonprofit sector and the private sector. And the DAS procurement team, whom I feel very privileged to serve at this point, did really remarkable work under the direction of the governor and the commissioner in sourcing and partnering with the private sector and with the not-for-profit sector to be able to secure that equipment and ensure that it got into the hands of those like hospitals, law enforcement officials, schools, and other agencies who really had need when they needed it. And those efforts very directly helped slow the spread of COVID-19 and helped to save lives. One of the things that Josh mentioned, which is really, really critical, is that we want to take the lessons learned from having to throw out that old playbook to learn how can we build on the successes that we had there, and how do we move forward with things like this bill and others to break down silos between agencies to further enhance the relationships we have with the nonprofit sector and with our business partners, so that we can build on that collaboration, so that we're all prepared for the next emergency, so that we have put in place a method of frictionless commerce that allows all parties to work together, so that you'll understand it when we say in Connecticut, we mean business. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce at this point Dr. Rohit Bala.
Thank you. Thanks, Gene. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Rohit Bala, Senior Vice President for Clinical Affairs and Quality at Stanford Health. I served as Incident Commander at my organization during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'd like to start by echoing thanks to Sharon and Grace Farms for the wonderful work that you did. Please know that it made a huge difference in the efforts at Stanford and in the region. I appreciate the opportunity to participate today. I'm glad to be here to support efforts to streamline and improve state procurement processes. Over the last 16 months, working with our fellow hospitals and the state, we implemented a collective response to the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, in Fairfield County, we set up a mutual aid system to ensure that hospitals had what they needed to support care for critically ill patients. This all-in-it-together mentality is part of what has helped us support the state's overall response to the pandemic. It also means that in response to future emergencies, we all have a stake in the effectiveness of each other's ability to respond. That is why the improvements made to state procurement in this bill benefit all of us, has been well documented. The ability to secure PPE was an extraordinary challenge in the spring of 2020. It was only by collective and sustained effort that we were able to secure necessary supplies and equipment. Through partners in Connecticut, we received items such as masks and disinfectants and testing support, among other items. We know that among certified vendors serving Stanford Health, 25% are based in Connecticut. This legislation will help promote economic activity in Connecticut. More streamlined and nimble state procurement processes, especially in times of emergency, will help the state and the public health system to anticipate supply needs, to respond quickly, and to get those supplies to their partners like hospitals. It will expand the supplier pool to include small and minority-owned businesses. We appreciate the governor's laser-like focus on pandemic response and his commitment to improving state processes to better prepare us for the next emergency. And with that, I'll turn the podium to Wyatt Bosworth from CBIA. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Doctor. And thank you to Grace Farm for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to be here representing the business community and speaking to an issue of critical importance to employers across the state, particularly small businesses. Streamlining and modernizing state government operations, services, and processes improves Connecticut's business climate, making it easier to do business with the state while enhancing the taxpayer return on investment. Those are themes central to CBIA's Rebuilding Connecticut policy framework, a set of common sense ideas for creating a positive business climate, for growing jobs and driving critical investments in infrastructure and our cities as we navigate the state's recovery from the significant economic disruptions of the pandemic. As we saw last week with the release of CNBC's America's Top States for Business rankings, Connecticut's making real progress in addressing many of the issues that inhibit private sector investment, job creation, and economic growth. So we have really a historic opportunity to reimagine Connecticut through public-private partnerships, working with the government and the business community and the nonprofit sector. To fully leverage that opportunity, we have to reshape the relationship between job creators and the state government. So we look forward to continuing to work with the Lamont administration and legislators to unlock Connecticut's true potential. Thank you, and with that, I have the honor to introduce Senator Will Haskell.
Thank you so much, Wyatt. It's hard to follow my many friends up here, so let me just be very brief and say how excited I am to be at Grace Farms. I don't think I've returned to this beautiful place since the start of this pandemic, but of course we've been in frequent touch. As our wonderful first selectman will point out, New Canaan has stepped up in countless ways over the course of this pandemic. Grace Farms, of course, supplying PPE at a moment when none of us knew how to find a mask. Now it seems that they're everywhere, everywhere you look, but we have to remember that at the start of this pandemic, just how scary it was and how grateful we were to have Grace Farms stepping up for institutions like Stanford Hospital and so many other first responders and frontline workers. To the Waveney Life Care Network, to Silver Hill Hospital just down the road, in so many ways, New Canaan stepped up to make sure that this state remains safe. So I think it's really fitting and wonderful that we've returned here on this momentous occasion. You know, there are a lot of lessons learned during this pandemic. We learned what PPE stood for. We learned that while some people are able to conveniently and efficiently transfer their operations and work from home, that's not true for frontline workers like those who stock the grocery shelves and those who show up every day to do the important work that's done at Stanford Hospital. We learned that Governor Lamont, if he ever gets sick of politics, could host a daily talk show. But perhaps most importantly, we learned that our state government is antiquated in more ways than one. We found that out the hard way in some cases. I remember constituents in New Canaan and elsewhere calling me up and wondering why their unemployment claim hadn't been processed yet. And I had to explain that unfortunately the state was still operating on a system called COBOL, which dated back decades. We had failed to modernize our state government. So this year when we returned to the legislature and when Governor Lamont put forward his bills before the legislature, you saw a variety of things. You saw us trying to grapple with the global health pandemic. You saw the state trying to recover from the worst recession since the Great Depression. But perhaps most importantly, and the most lasting change that was made in these recent few months in Hartford, is a modernization of state government. Commissioner Gabal said it so well. Why in the world, in the 21st century, are we requiring anybody to submit their forms via mail? In the GAE committee, we tackled this in a separate bill as it relates to voting. We thought it was crazy that in order to get an absentee ballot, you couldn't send in a paper form. But I'm so glad that the governor's administration brought a focus to the procurement process and that this bill made it out of the Government Administration and Elections Committee, where I happen to serve as vice chair as well. There are so many areas where our government is crying out for modernization, and this bill is just a huge step forward. There's just one thing I want to highlight in the bill that hasn't come up yet, and that's the fact that whenever possible, we should be using Connecticut companies and investing in Connecticut technology, building jobs here in Connecticut, building partnerships between the state of Connecticut and the private sector. And this legislation specifically, I don't know if we have anybody from Connecticut Innovations here, but this legislation specifically enables Connecticut Innovations, which is the venture capital arm of our state, to form an innovation lab where they bring state agencies together with growing technology companies so that we can find areas to work together, areas that will be mutually beneficial. I'm so excited to see how this bill will have such a long-term impact on our state, and I think it's my honor now to introduce a very good friend of mine, somebody who is truly a champion for efficient and effective state government, our Governor, Ned Lamont.
He's pretty good, isn't he? He's half the age of anybody else in the state senate. It's quite remarkable. It'd be great if we could get a few more of the meetings down here. Just this brings a certain peace. And Sharon, thank you. And I just love what you've been able to create here and the message it sends and dedication to fairness and justice and bringing people together. And what you were able to do 14 months ago, as Josh was saying, right during the peak of the pandemic when we were still really trying to figure it out. And we had healthcare workers, nursing homes, small business, everybody, circling the Capitol. Where's my PPE? I need it now. And, there was no stockpile in Washington, D.C., by the way. There was nothing behind that curtain. There was nothing there. So we were looking all over the globe. And then I heard about this place, Grace Farms. Hold it. These guys got 2 million pieces? How do we learn from this? And what you were able to do, that was a lifesaver at a time, Sharon, when people really needed it. And at that point, Josh and I really worked on every single network we could find and found some relationships in China and able to secure what we could. But we couldn't do it under the old normal processes. I'm sorry. I mean, the wave was crashing on the beach, and we didn't have time for a 2-month notification before the RFP and 7 paper copies with a notary public. We had to move pretty fast, and we were able to move pretty fast. And soon after Grace Farms helped lead the way, we've got the PPE we needed, and you wouldn't believe the first responders standing and cheering that somehow they were able to go to work the next day just a little bit more safely. And I think that's part of the learning process as we've tried to make it through this COVID. And I know a lot of people were cheering, yippee, we're out of the woods, happy days are here again. But the good news is that Connecticut is more likely to be vaccinated and less likely to be infected than anywhere else. And Kevin, that's particularly true right here in New Canaan, thanks to your good efforts. And we need trusted representatives like the first selectman to be able to speak out to those who are still a little bit hesitant while we still have, 30+% of our folks not vaccinated. And our infection rate has gone up. The headline always says triple. Don't say triple. We've gone from 0.5% to 1.5%, still the lowest in the country. But it just reminds you that we still have to be careful, and we still have to be able to think fast, and we still have to be agile and move on our feet. And that's in part what this bill is all about. I got to tell you, the guys that sell paper in the notary publics are not going to be all that happy with us, but I'd like to think that for the people of Connecticut, we're going to be better able to serve you. We'll be better able to serve you faster, with more efficiency, at less cost, what that means to the taxpayers, and also, as Josh said, just a little bit more fairly. You simplify the process, you can get it out to a wider group of folks who otherwise sometimes don't have the opportunity to bid, folks from some of our urban communities, some of those smaller businesses, and make sure that these Connecticut companies have an opportunity to get to the front of the line and make sure we get the services we need. So that's what this bill is all about, but it was inspired by really the good work here of Grace Farms and what you're able to do for people, what you're able to do with heart, and what you're able to do with efficiency. And with that, let's sign the bill.
Vice Chair. Sharon.
You deeply honored deserve. Who wants one?
Please give that to Kathy for us. He was an amazing guy.
Used to have silver quill pens, but it's a carry of posterity.
Purchased via reverse auction. We have one to Senator Flexer and Representative Fox. Very good.